and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. I usually say my guest this week for each show, but today I have two. They are Adam Twidell and Carol Cork, co-founders of PrivateFly, a hugely successful business that grew and grew until it was acquired a few years ago. They've also done so much since, which they'll talk about later, and which on its own is a fascinating story, though it's their entrepreneurial journey with PrivateFly that we'll look at today. Adam and Carol also happened to be married to one another before they even started the business. Could you work with your spouse? Not everyone could, and their story is simply fascinating in so many respects. So usually I start by asking, where did it all start? And of course, in their case, I got a different kind of answer.
Well, it started in all bar one, but I don't think we'll go into those details.
Maybe not, but yeah. No, but that's how we met. But before that, we had quite different careers to each other, which actually in many ways was, one of the successes, I think, of PrivateFly was bringing our very different skill sets together. I guess from an aviation point of view, Adam, you probably should start with where you came from.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be taught to fly in the Air Force, had 10 great years flying the Hercules. And then I left, and I didn't want to join an airline. That was going to be a little bit too restrictive in terms of fun of flying for me. And I entered into the fantastic world of private aviation. There are so many benefits for pilots who enjoy their flying to fly private jets. And I joined a company called NetJets, who are now one of our competitors, actually. But I had a fantastic time with them, flying around Europe, the Middle East, Africa, meeting some amazing customers. But one thing I quickly realized is that many of these guys who were flying by private jet had no idea how much it should be costing them. And they were always paranoid that they were paying too much. And when I tried to see who would be able to explain to private jet customers how much it should be costing, there was absolutely no information really out there. Every trip was priced differently, and there's certainly no way of comparing the market online. So for me, this was a huge gap in the market. Around us, everything else was being sold online, but private jets weren't. So I started really bugging Carol about the reason for this.
Yeah, I mean, I was at that point, actually, I was working as a marketing consultant. But before that, my background, I'm a marketeer by trade. I've worked in the media for a fairly long time before PrivateFly, working for large organisations. Condé Nast was one of the biggest stints that I did. I knew luxury goods and I knew the travel industry very well. I didn't know private aviation particularly, but I obviously did through Adam. But, we were talking a lot about how pretty much every other portion of travel had been transformed through digital technology in terms of brokering, but also how travel was completely moving online in terms of content marketing, in terms of the consumer, going onto Google and looking for whatever their product or experience was. And that so many people said to us, but no one's going to look for a private jet online. That's ridiculous. And that in itself for an entrepreneur is a really interesting thing to hear, because that's a challenge. And we love that.
Why was that though? Because, that you'd imagine that, if you're jetting around as a sort of rich person on a private jet, smart people, you'd have thought if anyone was going to go online and sort of search for things that they would. But was there just it just wasn't?
Oh, I think
just on the infrastructure
customers were probably searching, but the industry was very backward. It was very entrenched with traditional brokers behind desks, operating telephones, phoning around to get prices. There was a huge lack of transparency, and the industry just didn't want to see itself as an online product. They thought it was far too complicated, and they also thought that people who are booking a private jet, and it's a very expensive item, even if you're just chartering one for a one-off flight, they wouldn't want to spend that much money online. In fact, one of the early industry events that we spoke at about what we were trying to do, we were shouted down by one of our competitors who said nobody will ever book a private jet online. And after that, one of the reporters in the room from the Financial Times came up to us and said, Adam and Carol, you're obviously upsetting people. Tell me more about your business. And they did a fantastic article about us. So, having people wanting to shoot you down at the beginning can be an incentive, and many positives in that in launching a business.
If you're upsetting someone, something tells you that you must be doing something right because you're sort of challenging the status quo.
I think that's absolutely true. And I also think that, there's a tendency sometimes to be very black and white about these things. Is someone going to book a private jet online? They're not going to purely go with a company that they find through search marketing, but that is going to be a very primary tool that they're going to use amongst the rest of their decision making. And I think that that's what the industry, didn't really understand at that point. And that was our opportunity to actually, very quickly come in and actually be very visible through digital marketing. We didn't have the deep pockets at that point of any of our competitors, but we had a very different perspective and a different slant, and we were able to get very prominent very quickly and shape the industry a bit, which was fantastic.
At that point, were you like the only people who were making those, putting the 2 and 2 together and making 4, if you like, on that, or were there other sort of nascent sort of competitors who were sort of also trying to get in the market?
We were certainly the only ones in Europe, and I think we were certainly the first people to be able to take a customer all the way through booking a private jet online, from the inquiry to the pricing to the booking to the paying to the actual flight. Should they want to do the whole journey online, as Carol indicated earlier, it's really up to the customer to decide on their journey. And we would speak to and communicate with our customers on any platform that they wanted to use. There were other people attempting this in the States, but the States was seen as a very different market at the time. But we got the bit between our teeth, Trevor, and we thought, no, this is worth going for. So I guess the first big decision was how we were going to fund this, because we needed to build some tech, we needed to write some code. And we had a quick discussion, and it was a fairly quick discussion, and we decided we'd put our house on the market and use the proceeds to build the company, and that's what we did. We went all in right at the very beginning.
Was it that easy, or was there? I mean, you made it sound very easy, but I mean, there must have been a bit of agonizing, surely, if you're putting a house on the market, or not house on the line, if you like.
We had 2 very young children. We both left very senior full-time roles. That I then went into consultancy. Adam left NetJets and was flying. You were freelance flying, I think, at that point, at the beginning. And I think that it was a massive decision to take financially, and a big step into the unknown. We hadn't launched businesses before. We were first-time entrepreneurs in that respect. But I think in some ways that helps. There's a little bit of naivety there, and I would say that to anyone else. I think you can have serial entrepreneurs who've stepped into those shoes many times, and there are huge advantages to that. But in our case, and probably others, if you haven't done it before, but you believe in what you're doing, then you learn as you go, you remain open, and you just give it 100%. Then I think that also can be a big advantage when you don't really know what you're stepping into sometimes.
Yeah, I almost feel like I'm back there with you at the moment. I can feel the intensity of the passion that you probably had, and also probably thinking, let's just keep moving. Let's keep moving. Let's not think about the house too much. Let's just keep moving. But alongside the intensity of passion, did you at that point have, other things that people say you should always have, like, clarity of purpose there and the detail in the plan? I mean, were there bits missing in the plan, or the vision, if you like, of what you were trying to do? What did you have and what didn't you have that you should have had?
Yeah, I think we were actually very well structured from an early stage. We actually outsourced our technology and our development to a fantastic team who are based in India, who actually grew with us and have now become a significant tech business themselves. And we came together at a really opportune stage with them, and we had a very, very good journey for them for many years afterwards, actually. But we also won a kind of dragon's den for the travel industry really early on. And that helped us enormously, because we were then exposed to some very senior players, some investors who helped us get very structured from an early stage. We had board meetings, we had KPIs, we had a very good business plan and structure for growing this fledgling business into where we wanted it to go. And I think that structure early on really helped us, actually.
Yeah, focus was important, especially for Carol, because she was dealing with me, and I probably was the worst tech developer going because I always wanted to change direction. I saw an opportunity here and I thought, yes, let's go for that. But I think it's really important to remain nimble, of course, to not fear going down a road, but knowing when to actually just focus on a few things rather than a lot of things. And Carol very quickly wrote up on a huge piece of paper a commercial lens for me. And she said, before you bring an idea forward, could you just go through this checklist? And if you tick 3 out of the 4 boxes, then let's discuss it. But if you don't, if you're not ticking these boxes, it's probably not a good idea, Adam.
Right. I mean, that's very true. And that remaining focused while remaining agile, I would give that as advice actually to other entrepreneurs. Have your focus, have your KPIs. We had a fantastic traffic light system actually, and attached to that, another piece of advice and that I would give as well is, take on people. Don't scrimp on taking on fantastic people around you as early as you can, because you can't do it all on your own. No entrepreneur can. And I think that we took on a fantastic finance director quite early on, as well as having a great chairman who we met through that Dragon's Den that we mentioned earlier. But we had some great non-execs. We were surrounded by good advice, and that, you can be in your business 24/7. You can have a vision as much as you like, but you need to know that you can't do it alone, and you need to bring in people in many areas who are better than you and accept that and don't think you know everything.
In some regards, I think that was our mistake, that we didn't hire people early enough, and we battled on, the two of us, being increasingly exhausted because we were answering calls 24 hours a day. When I was flying, Carol was doing all of the operations as well. Yeah, we should have taken on more people early and really, there's a good phrase in the States, about going big early, going bust early if it has. But, you want to force out, is this business going to work? I think one of the worst things that can happen to an early stage business is it just trucks on. It doesn't have the hockey stick curve that you promise people, but it's not failed. And it's just, growing, but ever so slowly. And entrepreneurs then can be stuck in a business. And that's probably the worst situation. It's better to either have failed or made it. So go big, go early, and if it works, great. If not, move on to something else.
Okay, I love that. Go big, go early. Can I just unpick a couple of those things you were talking about? So there's this Dragon's Den competition that you won, and everybody can imagine what that's like, and they're probably thinking about images on the TV and so on. But what did they say they saw in you? And did that surprise you? I mean, was it your zest, or was it something like saying they've got this zest, but actually they seem to have their heads screwed on? I'm just sort of interested in what they said to you at that time. And also, the downside of having the dragons, if you like, sort of backing you, is that, as you rightly said, J curves, whatever you want to call it, sort of the pressure is then on. Were they also educational to you in terms of saying to you just what you said to me, that you need to get other talent on board or so on, or did they leave you alone?
I think they understood. I think one of the appeals, I believe, was that we'd put some skin in the game ourselves. That was one aspect, that we had, really, I think that for a lot of people investing in your business, if you can see that an entrepreneur has really put not just their heart and soul, but their own money and their own risk in there, that was very appealing when we were going out for investment, because people understood that we'd taken a chunk of risk ourselves. I think that the market opportunity was very clear when we spoke to investors and to our first chairman for the business. He was an extremely big player in the travel industry, and he was just amazed by the scale and the size of the opportunity. Although private jets are considered niche, it was a fantastic opportunity to take quite an unknown and unseen business online, and that was, I think, tremendously exciting.
We also had a working model. This wasn't just a paper business. We, from the very early stage, launched the product and just wanted to see what would happen when it was launched. So we had customers, and it was moving around. The cogs were turning. So we had revenue. Of course, we weren't profit making at that point, but we had a business that was showing signs that this could work.
Yeah. And I think, at that point, and it was an interesting stage as well. It was, it was 2008, and there was a big recession. That was you take an opportunity. You could say that's a terrible time to launch a business, but actually in those situations, that's when customer behavior can change, and that's when you have an opportunity. Perhaps when people are more cost conscious, or there's some entrenched relationships that customers might have with their brands, but they're suddenly open-minded to look for something else. And there's always a timing opportunity when you're launching a business, and you have to look at the timing very carefully and think, well, what's happening now that I can really attach our business to and make it very timely. And I think that's an area with content marketing that businesses can really think about and attach their story to. What is the current climate that I can make our business really relevant for the customer.
I can see how, particularly at that moment, 2008, 2009, people starting to sort of watch the pennies, if you like, in terms of tickets like sort of a private jet and so on, and then there you are, you're there at that sort of turning point in the market and so on. I want to get onto the question of what that does when there's a sudden upsurge in demand and things start to go your way quite dramatically. And you to mention the word, Adam, exhaustion, of that period where, you're both sort of taking on too much and you probably haven't got quite to that realization moment. That could have gone on for a long time. Maybe it did go on for a long time. I mean, what snapped you out of it? What made you, what was there a moment like, suddenly,
Yeah, there was.
Carol was in Los Angeles, you were in
No,
Moscow.
we were both on
You
holiday.
didn't know what was going on, or what happened, or you're just lying on it in a dark room somewhere or something.
We're on holiday with a group of friends and their young kids in Italy in a fantastic country house. And we never saw our kids that week. We were both working, trying to get internet. It was the best week of the business so far. We had so many inquiries and bookings, and we were working flat out. Luckily, we have got fantastic friends who were there for us and understood and just took our kids off for the day. But when we got back, we realized that something had to change, because there we were trying to have a family holiday, and it was anything but for us, and it was hugely stressful. We just thought, no, we've got to take on people. We've got to raise some money. At that stage, we had competitors who were starting on the horizon, and we realized that they were fundraising. They would be in a position of strength unless we really kept our momentum going. And that's when we expanded into Europe with multiple language sites and started hiring lots of talent into St. Albans to answer all of the inquiries in multiple languages.
Yeah, and I think going back to what we said, accepting that you can't do it all. You've got to let go a little bit, and you've got to work on the business, not in the business, is another piece of advice, because you can be very heads down working on the day-to-day function of your business, and unless you can have the ability to step back sometimes and think, okay, what's the next stage? How can we be strategic here? I think that's a risk as you go. At the beginning, you've got to roll your sleeves up, and you've got to be everything. You've got to be able to make the tea. You've got to be able to mend the photocopy. You've got to do everything at the beginning, but later you've got to be able to step back and be strategic, and you can't do that if you're trying to do everything operationally as well.
Okay, so just to that moment, just before you saw the light in Italy and decided that things needed to change. I mean, how did it affect things, like in terms of if the two of you were talking about a strategic decision that you had to make and you happened to disagree, and you also happened to be under the same roof as well? I mean, do you ever take that home? Do you ever sort of is there a sort of like literally a line where you just think 6 o'clock, we don't talk about business, or did it spill over at times?
We didn't actually, and I think that this is something we've talked about before, because I think, and we spoke to other husband and wife entrepreneurs who have been on similar journeys, albeit in very different sectors. But I think, the way that we did it was that we didn't set those kind of arbitrary cutoffs, because that in itself creates stress and tension, and I think it's not realistic. And we were also in a business that never sleeps. It's a 24/7 business. And so I think the best thing was that we accepted that, and accepted this is a phase. It won't be forever. We are going to grow this business, and we're all in here. And I think, of course there were tensions. We disagreed. There'd be, early hours of the morning with really massive decisions to take. But I think if you accept that you're taking those together and you're all in a way, that's easier than trying to sort of say it's cut off, it's date night, it's dinner time, because that's just not going to happen.
Adam?
No, I think actually there are actually many benefits of that. There are many different ways to run it. We had a very family atmosphere at work. If the business started to feel like another child, we had 2 kids plus the business, and as the child grew, it grew with our kids, and they were often in the office. We had brought our dog to work. We had many dinners in our house. People stayed overnight. Employees. It felt, and this is what's lovely now when people are reflecting on that stage of the business, everybody felt the same, that it was a great place to work, and it did feel like a family business. And I think even in the private jet sector, many of our customers really appreciated that they were working with a family business. So we didn't advertise that we were husband and wife, but we didn't hide it, and we certainly made use of the marketing opportunity when journalists were looking for a husband and wife story.
And I think our non-execs and our chairman advised us like that. You don't, in America, often people said they talked about them as mom and pop shops if you had, you had a family business. And that can actually be quite derogatory. But actually, the family environment, you can still be a big, fast-growing, exciting entrepreneurial environment, but still have family values. And I think that was one of the things that we managed to get, I think, do very well and that from a recruitment point of view, and the culture that we had as a business at that point was really energized and really exciting, because I think the people we took on felt that they were on that entrepreneurial journey with us, and that was exciting.
And in terms of arguments, we weren't the only people making the decisions. We really tried to empower the team to make decisions, and if those decisions weren't going to bring the company down, we didn't necessarily have to be involved in them. We wanted them to be able to make decisions and go for it. But we had a very key finance director from the beginning, and Vicky was fantastic in those situations where perhaps Carol and I disagreed. She was very balanced and was able to steer us to probably the right decision at that time.
Yeah, exactly. We had a couple of non-execs, a chairman, finance director, us. So our board meetings became 6, 7 people as opposed to 2 people, and that really helps. And I think going back to one thing we touched on at the beginning, which it was interesting. I was chatting to someone at the weekend. In fact, we were at a wedding of one of our team who's now going on to be quite an exciting entrepreneur himself, and that was really brilliant to see. But I was at a table with another a couple and the guy who is launching a really interesting business, and he was talking about his co-founder, who's not his wife, but someone that he said, they're really different to me, they're actually much more intelligent than me, they work harder than me. And it was quite interesting, and I thought, actually the best thing you can possibly do is have massive respect for people that you start a business with, but try and have your own areas, have your own territories within that business. And as the business gets bigger, that becomes easier. You run different departments, you have very different areas of responsibility, and that dilutes any tension that you have by who's the boss, who's making the decision.
Okay, and I just out of interest, slightly out of context question here, but did you have entrepreneurial kind of ancestry, if you like? Were your parents, were they entrepreneurs at all? Was there any sort of entrepreneurial gene passed down? And also, have your kids shown any kind of entrepreneurial zeal from being in and around entrepreneurs?
No, I think we came from parents who had very traditional jobs. So it was quite a shock to my mother-in-law when she learned that we were selling the house, and that was a tricky period of time. Okay. I think she's forgiven me now.
She has, yeah. But Adam, to be fair to Adam, I think Adam has a very entrepreneurial vibe anyway, naturally. Yeah. I probably less so, but I think actually, therefore, again, that was a benefit, because I'm always the slightly more, I guess, balanced individual in terms of that commercial lens that we talked about earlier. But I think actually what you said there, Trevor, is interesting, because our son is really entrepreneurial himself. He's doing some, he's got local business ideas that he's doing. We've got a load of chickens in the garden. He's selling the eggs to all our neighbours. He's looking at car detailing, how we can do that. I think he's showing real energy for being entrepreneurial and thinking differently, and that's exciting. And you did that as a kid actually as well. And I think that you're never too young to be an entrepreneur and try and think things differently.
It's really interesting you say that, because I mean, it's made me think back, because not long after I'd set up my business, that I went out one summer's day and found the kids had set up a stall outside the house, and they were just selling stuff. I mean, some of it was actually our stuff that we hadn't actually told them they could sell, but that's a different story. But
that's very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, it's very entrepreneurial. But I think there is certainly, if you're growing up in and around people who are in that, with that kind of energy and sort of zeal, then it must sort of rub off in some way. I want to move on a little bit to the business has grown now. You've got lots of different people, as you said, so the dynamics of the business have changed. So there's period of growth and success, and then obviously somebody liked it enough to decide they wanted to buy the business. How did that come about? Was it sort of an accidental conversation, or had you had that in mind, that one day we want to sell the business to somebody? How did it work?
Yeah, the plan was very much to grow the business to a point and have an exit opportunity from that. We did encounter the group, a fantastic aviation group that acquired Private Fly earlier on in our journey. We spoke to our competitors and the industry as openly as we could from an early stage, and I think that really helped, because we had a lot of interest around us, but we did realise that actually the FlexJet group, actually, who then acquired us down the line, but were a company that we had enormous respect for and were really excited by. And we shared quite openly our journey, and we met the chairman quite early on. So we hoped that they might become perhaps the right home for Private Fly later, and that actually did work out, which was fantastic. We did run, it was 10 years on from the start, and we ran a process, because we did start to get various approaches. So we ran a process including them, and but we were delighted, both for ourselves but also for our team, that they had a fantastic opportunity to then go and be within a big global, fantastically impressive group in private aviation, and that's given the team some brilliant opportunities to move forward with their careers as well, which is really gratifying.
And in terms of the team, we didn't hide anything from them. We were very clear with everybody. It wasn't a major talking point, but they knew that eventually we were looking for somebody to grow the business and to take a stake in it. So we issued share options to the team who'd been there after a certain period of time. And when we eventually had the transaction, it was fabulous that many of the team actually benefited financially from that, as well as being able to build their careers in a much larger way in a very diverse group.
And we had as well, sorry, Trevor, but we also had a number of angel investors in Private Fly at that point as well. So they were obviously part of that decision that we took to give them a good return on the investment and the trust that they placed in us when we raised the funding a few years earlier than that. So that was also part of the decision to get them the right return on their investment, which we did.
And have you both stayed? I noticed, Carol, that you'd stayed involved with the business post sale, although you're not now. Is that correct?
That's right. I for a while, and then mine was a bit of a curveball that I didn't expect, but then I hit a big health situation in that I lost all my hearing very suddenly, which obviously hugely unexpected, but and that obviously changed kind of everything for me, and I stepped away from the business and exited from the business, and was able to then concentrate on a big journey to have cochlear implants, and which is another big story possibly, but but that for me has been a brilliant and very fortunate outcome now.
Well, these life events, you suddenly realize how much they dominate our thinking, even though we all kind of in our everyday work, we're sort of talking about the business, doing the business, then something comes along and then just knocks us for six, and then that sort of drives everything else. But you're still doing lots of stuff now, though, aren't you, Carol?
I then obviously stepped away. I had a break. I'm profoundly deaf, but I can hear through cochlear implant technology, which itself is amazing. So
Yeah.
I've got involved with some project work actually with the neuroscience team at Cambridge University, which was where I had my surgery and who looked after me incredibly well. I'm now getting more involved in some investment work ourselves. I'm doing some angel investments, starting to get my feet back into that area and from the other side of the fence, which is really exciting. So I'm hoping to do some more non-exec work as well as continuing perhaps through the deaf community as well, so I can kind of give back in some areas there. But yeah, so I'm for me it's brilliant to be involved perhaps on the other side of the fence, and I have a massive interest and exciting opportunity, I think, to perhaps look at other entrepreneurs and see how I can give back.
Okay, I'll come back to that in a second, actually. But Adam, in terms of what you've been doing, sort of there's the future of flight, as I sort of understand it. Tell me a bit about the stuff that you're up to as well.
One thing to note about the arrangement we had with FlexJet, who acquired the business, is that neither Carol nor myself had an earnout, which was quite unusual. Normally, when the founders are kind of encouraged to stay in financially over a period of time, but we didn't have that. It was just trust and kind of reinforced that we've found a really fantastic home for private flying in the team. But I continued to run the business for a couple of years, and then a fantastic opportunity was presented to me. We have a very large group, lots of different companies within it, all within private aviation. We operate 300 private jets and helicopters in London and New York and Florida. Simulator training school is one investment, fuel companies, it goes on. But our chairman was very keen, as I was, that we did something more sustainable in the future. So I'm looking after an order of electric aircraft.
Cool. Okay.
And so hopefully the future of short haul flying is very much more sustainable than we've got now. So it's an incredibly exciting area of aviation. Lots of companies all developing electric aircraft and hydrogen powered aircraft. And I'm right in the very center of it, which is fantastic.
Right. I mean, getting back to the sort of flying side of things, that, I mean, I can imagine that nothing would make you feel more free than sort of getting up in a plane and sort of flying around in the sky, and in a slightly corny way, bringing it back to the business side of things. I mean, are you feeling that sense of freedom, Adam and Carol, sort of in terms of what you're doing now? Does it feel you get up and do what you want, basically? Or do you feel as though, no, I've got these new obligations, new responsibilities? I mean, it's not what is it? How does it feel? Does it feel like you have a greater sense of freedom than in the private fly days, or does it just feel a bit different?
Well, one thing is the FlexJet group is very entrepreneurial. It's not a classic American corporate by any means, and nobody has ever been shouted down for a bad idea. Everybody's really encouraged to improve the business each day and to make suggestions. So it does feel like a fantastic entrepreneurial area. And when we were looking at all of the different options to sell the company to, one thing which was very clear to me when I was in the States, when I met pilots who flew for FlexJet, is they were happy. And believe me, pilots are not always happy. Yeah. And these guys really enjoyed the job. Their customers felt involved in the company, and it really did feel like a family business. So no, I'm very much enjoying it. Given a huge amount of trust to continue to expand the business in this particular area. So it feels great. Yeah, jump out of bed every morning.
Yeah, Carol?
For me, it has obviously given me the freedom to explore, other projects, and to give me flexibility in my life, in terms of family life, in terms of exploring other business interests and having, a bit more of a portfolio career as I move forward myself. There is a real freedom in that. I think, one of the reasons, though, that we actually started a business from the beginning, and I'm sure other entrepreneurs may feel this, is that we wanted to be in control of our own destiny. So you asked about, does it give you more freedom? But actually, freedom is about starting your business in the first place. And I think that for Adam as well, he felt that he didn't want to just, I won't say just, but to have someone else always deciding his roster, deciding his schedule. And I felt the same. I thought, here is an opportunity. It doesn't mean that you don't work hard. It just means that you you set the pace and you're the one who's in charge of it. And I think so in some ways that hasn't changed. You just have to be your own boss. And I still feel that. So
yeah, you're absolutely right about the freedom that you feel. I mean, when I set up my business, my wife said, "Why do you want to set up this business then?" And I said, "Well, I'm fed up with working for idiots." And she said, "Yes, you want to be one of the idiots." But alongside that, I didn't see it like that, of course, because to me there was a freedom just in the starting process, which is really important. And some people love it. It's not for everyone. Some people are scared by it. But it gets me back to, I suppose, the key question of this whole sort of podcast really is that if you were advising somebody at the start of their entrepreneurial journey, that to give them the confidence to succeed as well. You've mentioned some of these wonderful things that you've said about lessons and so on. But if you had to sum it up into sort of one or two things, what sort of advice would you both pass on?
Just go for it. You talked at the beginning about the risks, and as a pilot, especially as a military pilot, you're always weighing up decisions. What's the benefits if this decision goes well, and what will happen if this doesn't go well? What's the risks here? And I think in a country like the UK and predominantly throughout Europe, there's a huge safety net. And although we sold our house, and we risked everything financially to set the business up. Should it have failed, we knew that our kids would still be educated, that we would have healthcare through the NHS, and we could start again and build up. So when there really was a massive safety net, it took away a lot of the risk for us. So I think it's not the same if you're starting a business in India, for example, with very little social safety net apart from family. So appreciate what you've got around you. Appreciate the risking everything might not actually be risking everything, and just go for it, I would say.
I would say, and one thing that we did well and gave us so many opportunities down different avenues is tell everybody your story. You might, don't hold back on telling everyone what you're doing, what your story is, what your passion is. I think if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to, whether that's someone down the pub, whether that's someone in a networking event that you've gone to, because there's so many avenues that come about from telling people what you do and showing your passion. And I think that we had real opportunity. We got amazing press coverage, media coverage around private flight, and a lot of that was because we really did believe in the story we were telling and the brand that we were building. So talk to everyone, tell them what you're doing, and don't hold back, aim high, and you'll see the results from that.
Aim high, says Carol, and just go for it, says Adam, and I couldn't agree more with either point. There was another point there as well near the end that struck a chord with me, that freedom to them was all about starting the business in the first place, that you've got to enjoy the journey as well as the destination. And I also just loved the way that Adam and Carol told their story as well as the story itself. They dovetailed beautifully, built on each other's points of view, and generally told their story in a fantastic and entertaining way. I love this combination of positivity and planning, the go for it, said Adam, and Carol's strong commercial lens, traffic light systems for making good decisions and so on. And the power of telling everybody your story, as Carol put it, and recognising that you can't do it all yourself. They built a great structure and team around them to help them deliver. So thank you to Adam and Carol, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business, Merrible Media, you can find us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to join us for our next episode. But until then, thanks for listening.